All right, let's dive into a topic that many of us think we know pretty well: slavery in the British colonies. But as you're about to see, the true story, its massive scope, the economic machine that powered it, and the constant, powerful resistance it sparked is so much deeper. So let's kick things off with a quick question, one that might just challenge a really common assumption. Where was slavery a foundational part of the economy and society? Was it just A, the southern colonies, or was it B, all British colonies? Well, the answer is B. Slavery was, in fact, integral to the economic and social fabric of every single one of the British colonies.
So yeah, get ready because we're about to dig into how this system became so deeply woven into the fabric of all of British America, and not just one corner of it.
Just try to wrap your head around this number. Around 3 million. That's how many captive Africans were forcibly brought to British territories. This wasn't just some abstract historical event. It was a massive, horrific operation built on individual human lives and suffering. And this brings us to our first really big point. This was not just a Southern story. The reach, the influence, and the sheer brutality of slavery were there from the very beginning, in every corner of British America. I mean, the horror of the system is clear before anyone even set foot on land. The Middle Passage alone is just staggering. We're talking about an estimated 500,000 people who died just during the journey. And these weren't accidents. They were the direct result of the dehumanization that was baked into the entire operation. But why? What was fueling this unbelievably brutal system? What created such an insatiable, relentless demand for enslaved African labor? Well, the answer, as it often is, comes down to economics. It was the business of bondage. You could say the economic logic was kind of a perfect storm. First, you've got this vast, seemingly endless land in the colonies, perfect for growing cash crops. Then you've got this huge, growing demand back in Europe for things like sugar, tobacco, you name it. And that created a massive labor problem, because the old system of indentured servitude just couldn't keep up.
And this is where you see a really deliberate choice being made. See, indentured servants, they were temporary. They had some legal rights, and eventually their term of service ended. For the ambitions of the planters, that was just not a sustainable model. But enslaved Africans, the system being built was one of permanent hereditary bondage. They were legally defined as property, providing a permanent and completely controllable labor force.
Now, this massive economic shift, it didn't just happen. It couldn't. It had to be built piece by piece, using the law as a tool. The law itself was used to forge the chains of this new system, one based on race and total control. And if you want to point to one moment that really accelerated this, you have to look at Bacon's Rebellion back in 1676. What happened was, in Virginia, this really unlikely alliance formed between poor, angry white indentured servants and enslaved Africans. And together, they actually rose up against the colonial elite. You can imagine how much this terrified the wealthy planter class. The idea of the people they exploited uniting across racial lines was their worst nightmare. So their response was a very calculated, very deliberate divide and conquer strategy. Create a system strictly defined by race to drive a permanent wedge between poor whites and enslaved blacks. And this is what led to the legal creation of something called chattel slavery. It's a really important term to understand. The word chattel literally means movable property. The law was written to define a person and all of their children and their children's children as an item, no different than a piece of livestock or tool. These new laws, these slave codes, were basically built on 4 pillars of control. 1, people are legally property. 2, slavery is hereditary, passed down through the mother, which creates a self-replicating labor force. 3, owners have near absolute power, even getting away with murder. And 4, a rigid racial hierarchy is enforced, for instance by outlawing interracial marriage. It was a legal architecture for total dehumanization. And this is so important. Even in the face of all this, of this system designed to crush them, the human spirit could not be extinguished. Resistance was constant. It was a powerful daily display of agency and defiance. A lot of this resistance was covert, these hidden fights that happened every day. Things like preserving African music, languages, and beliefs in secret, naming your children traditional names, and even small acts of sabotage, like slowing down the pace of work or breaking tools. These weren't just small acts of defiance, they were a form of economic warfare, a way of holding on to their humanity. But sometimes resistance exploded into the open. The Stono Rebellion in 1739 is just a powerful, tragic example. It starts in the morning. A small group of enslaved men get their hands on weapons. They start marching south toward what they hoped was freedom in Spanish Florida. By midday, their numbers are growing as they burn plantations. But by late afternoon, the colonial militia confronts them. And in the aftermath, the rebellion is crushed.
Now, even though it failed, the Stono Rebellion sent absolute shockwaves through the colonies. Why? Because it completely shattered this myth, this lie, that enslavers told themselves, that the people they enslaved were somehow content. Stono was terrifying, undeniable proof that enslaved people would risk everything, they would fight and die, for a chance at freedom.
So as we start to pull all these threads together, the economic drivers, the legal construction, this constant powerful resistance, a really clear and, frankly, a very unsettling picture starts to emerge about the legacy of this system.
Here's the key takeaway. If there's one thing to remember, slavery in British America wasn't some kind of unfortunate accident. It was a machine. It was a powerful economic engine that was deliberately and carefully constructed in law, and it was met every single day with resistance. And all of this leaves us with a really big question, one that echoes way beyond the past. How did this very specific, legally built system of chattel slavery, with its enforced dehumanization and its rigid racial lines, how did it leave a structural imprint on society that we can still see and feel today? That's definitely something worth thinking about.